Hi guys, Kimberly here with the Three Sisters Block of the Month quilt group with Lickety Stitch Quilts. This month we're working on Block 2, Crown of Thorns. Again, you might be following their colorway, you might have your own colors written in and just be following their light and dark, or you might not be following their light and dark and kind of making your own alternative setting. That's fine, just make sure that you've got all your fabrics together. You know which fabric corresponds to which piece, and we will get started. This is the video for the alternative cutting and assembly instructions. Our big difference is we're going to make flying geese units and 4 half square triangles so that we have fewer small cut pieces to sew together and have some longer seams and not necessarily easier construction, but certainly fewer small triangles to sew together. So our first step is to cut the A piece, the 4 3/4 of your center, and for me it's this orange, and then we're going to make the flying goose units. So again, those are the B and C pieces, and we are going to make flying geese and attach them to A. Our A unit is cut to 4 3/4, so our flying goose is going to start out as 4 3/4 by 2 3/8, because flying geese are twice as long as they are tall. And so to do that, I'm going to use the fast flying goose method, also called the no waste flying goose method. But there's a little bit of waste because I'm going to make it a little bit big so we can cut it down. So for my background piece, my B fabric, I am going to cut 1 6 inch square, 1 6-inch square. And for the wings, my C fabric, I'm going to cut 4 3 1/4-inch squares. These are a little bit bigger than we did on class on Saturday, but we don't need to necessarily have quite so much to trim, so a little bit less waste. To put these together, we're going to mark the center line on our small squares. You can draw on it because we're going to cut down this line. It'll end up in the seam allowance. I like to fold mine in half and give a little press along the edge, mostly because I'm not real great at keeping track of where my pins are, and it's just easier. I've got my iron right here for me. So however you do that, and if you have a different flying goose method that is fail-safe and you've got one of those super happy rulers, or however you do it, you do you. Just, you need to have an unfinished flying goose that starts out at 4 3/4 by 2 3/8. So for this method, I'm going to take my big square and I'm going to lay it down right sides up, and then I'm going to line my smaller square up into that corner, and I am going to pin on either side away from what will be my sewing line so that I don't sew over pins. Okay, and then I'm going to take another one and I'm going to put it right down that same diagonal on the bottom, lining it up with this bottom corner. And it's going to overlap a little bit. That's okay. We want it to overlap. And we're going to pin it open, or pin it down here and pin it there. So I'm going to go to the machine and sew a 1/4 inch on either side, a 1/4 inch this way, and then a 1/4 inch this way, and we'll come back and cut that and open it up. I'm going to pause while we do that. Okay, so I've got my sew line down both sides, 1/4 inch off of my center line on both sides. I'm just going to take my ruler and line it up corner to corner. And eek, it doesn't want to line up corner to corner. And slice it open. I like these methods of flying geese because when I make them the traditional way, my flying geese always kind of look like they need a designated pilot. They're a little wonky, they don't like to go the right way. So we're going to open this up and just give it a little press. And I had a couple good reminders this week at our class on Saturday. I was reminded that I need to change my blades more often in my rotary cutter, so that's true. And then I think I was taking my stress out on my blocks because I was like digging into it and pressing so hard open I could see the thread in my seams. So I need to remember that my blocks are my friends. And we don't squish our friends hard enough that we can see their innards. That's not nice. So I'm being nice to them. So to finish this up, we are going to take, oh look, it's like a little heart. So cute. We're going to take this one and put it down in the corner here. And we're just going to line up the sides, line up the corner. Everybody's happy. And we're going to pin on either side again. And then we're going to do the same thing for the other block. It looks funny if you haven't used this method before. I promise it works. I think a bird just flew into my window. That was a thunk. Not awesome. Okie dokie. And we will go to the machine. And again, we are just going to sew, well, Jiminy, a 1/4 inch on either side of the fold. And then we're going to come back and press them open. And we'll have our flying geese. Okay, so we've got our sewn lines down each side of the middle. We're going to open that up. Give it a little squish. Nice. We're not going to be pounding on. Oops, that did not go well. Let's try that again. Okay. And then we're going to square these up. I'm putting together like a little handout with actual pictures of the squaring up because there's a little bit to it, but it protects your points. It saves it every time. So I'm using this ruler with a diagonal down the middle. I'm going to make sure that I'm not on the side that has the extra 1/2 inch. I did that and ended up having to redo a whole bunch of blocks once. So as I follow this down, there's the 1 inch mark, the 1 inch corner, the 2 inch corner. I'm going to go to this 2 1/8, this one line past the 2, and I am going to put my diagonal on the diagonal of the goose. The video is reversed, but my goose points to my left because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to put the point, the 2 1/8 inch point. My diagonal's lined up. My 2 1/8 inch point is right on the point of my goose. And that is to give me my 1/4 inch seam allowance and protect that. So this will be the first cut I make. Now I want to make sure that as I'm looking at this 2 3/8 inch line, I'm going to have enough goose on this side. If I didn't, I could rotate my ruler a bit to get myself that, and my diagonal would be just a little bit off, but that diagonal is okay to be a little bit off if you're protecting your point. So I'm going to scooch this so that I have 2 3/8, and I will come in exactly there. So I'm going to trim it up on my right side, and then I'm going to turn my point to the right, line up my 2 3/8 now, my full width, or height, I guess, on a goose, and trim that sliver off the left side. And that was a slivery sliver. Then I will just rotate my cutting board, and I'm going to line, again, the point of my goose up with my 2 3/8 because that's my half width. I'm going to line my bottom line up with my 2 3/8 line so I make sure I get a straight cut, and I will trim up on the right. And rotate it around. And now I'm going to line up my 4 3/4 with my newly trimmed edge and my 2 3/8 along the bottom. just any line along the bottom to get a straight line, and then trim up my side. And I have a trimmed flying goose. I'm going to do that one more time in the video, and then also do the pictures in the handout. So I'm going to make my goose point to my right. I'm going to line my diagonal line up with the diagonal on the goose. Put that 2 1/8 right in the corner. Make sure I have 2 3/8 along the way, that there's fabric up to or passing that. And then, oh, I just slipped my ruler. I'm going to trim up here on the right. I'm going to turn it around, line up my newly trimmed line with my 2 3/8 inch, and trim a little bit there. I'm going to point my goose up. You could point it down, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to put my 2 3/8 inch line right on the middle there. The dogs are very excited that we're doing this. And line up my bottom line so I have a straight cut line, and trim up the right side. I'm going to rotate it around, line up my 4 3/4, line up my bottom line, and trim up my side. And that's good. Our next unit is those 4 half squares. And for that, we are going to cut 1 each. So I'm sorry, it's this half square unit here. And it is our D and E fabrics, D and E. So we are going to cut 1 4 1/2 inch square of each color, and then sew all the way around all the edges. Let me get that cut and sewn around, and I will be back to show you, and we'll open it up. Okay, so I had 2 4 1/2 inch squares, right sized together, sewed all the way around both sides, so I have a little packet. I'm just going to cut an X and an X, and then open these up. An X and an X. And we did have a question about trimming, so that we keep our points like in the center. So we're just gonna do that real fast. You may not need it, you might. It's all good. We're gonna trim towards the BCDE fabric, the fabric that's on top pointing towards the outside of your square. So I'm just going to give it a little squish and press towards the E fabric, the fabric that's going to be on the top or the outside. Give it a little squish. We're going to open all 4 of them up, but I'm just going to show the trimming real quick. Again, I use my ruler with a diagonal line. It doesn't have to be a big one. It could be a smaller one, as long as it's got that diagonal down the middle there. And I'm going to line that diagonal up on the diagonal of the square almost to the top. I'm going to give myself the tiniest of slivers to trim here. I'm just trying to get it square on 2 sides. Ooh. And this is why I stopped using this ruler. So now I've got my 2 sides square. I'm going to flip those to my bottom corner. I am going to get out my bigger ruler. And I'm going to line the diagonal up on the diagonal. And then both sides, both square sides, the ones I just did, on my 2 3/8 inch line. And there also, if you have a square up ruler, will be a corner along your line that you can line up in that corner, the 2 3/8 inch corner. And we're just going to trim both sides. So we'll do that for all 4 of them. We'll give ourselves a teensy little trim line up top with the diagonal lined up just to make sure that we've got that in the corner. And then we'll rotate it down, put the diagonal back on, line up your 2 3/8 inch lines on both sides. I'm just a titch off, there we go. And trim. And then our corners go all the way to the corners. We're going to do that for all 4 of our blocks. Open them up, give them a squish, trim them up, and then we're going to cut the rest of the pieces just like in the cutting instructions. So we're going to cut F and H, your background and star point, I guess. 2 4 1/4 inch squares, and then you're going to bisect them twice corner to corner to make 8 triangles of each color. And then G is your background color corner square. And we're going to cut 4 3.5 inch squares of those. And so get your squares squared up, get your pieces cut, and we will come back and assemble this last set. Okay, we're ready to assemble our centerpiece. So we are going to do it in 3 lines. We're going to do the corner, flying goose corner, flying goose middle corner, and then again on the other side, corner, flying goose corner. I lay it out and sew it from this because I really like to sew stars. And I have ripped a couple of these blocks already, ending up with a star unit. So I'm going to lay it out and sew it just like this. It is your quilt. You do you. Maybe you want a star in the middle. I have nothing to say about that. It's your happy stuff. Whatever makes you happy. But so that I make sure I get the right pattern, I do lay it out and then sew it from the layout. So we're going to sew these together. We'll press the center towards the big square. And I did change out the color of my big square. I decided I needed more contrast, so you're not losing your mind. That is different than when we started the video. And for the side units, we will press towards the half square triangles and then sew them all together. Your seams will nest, and I'm going to pause and come back when I'm all sewn together. Okay, for the next part, I'm going to lay out my corner units because otherwise I get confused and they don't turn out so well. So I've got my corner squares that are going to sit diagonal to my flying goose point. And then I have my contrast color, my F unit that I have already cut into my triangles. And these line up with this corner square with the long edge along the corner square. I emphasize this because as a quilter, when I have triangles cut like this, I really want to sew them together and make half square triangles. But we're not going to do that. So we are going to line these up so that they make kind of like a, I don't know, a rocket triangle or something. So that they sew like this, and the short edge is here. And I line this out so I don't mess up, I don't miss sew and have to seam rip, which I will have to do on my Christmas color block because that happened. And so when I sew this, I'm going to sew these 2 units together and then these 2 units together to get 5 setting triangles. And then I'm going to sew one side to my square and the other side to my square and open. You can't just make 8 of these and flip them because they're mirror image. That won't work. So go ahead and lay it out so that you can see it, and then sew from your layout if you need to, like I do. So we're going to sew, it'll make 4 of these, and then we'll assemble it back. We are going to press towards our color away from the background color. So we're going to press towards our contrast color away from the background color on both sides of these. And then in the center here, the seam really doesn't line up with anything. It doesn't matter which way you press. I usually end up pressing the first side towards the center and then the second side away. But it's not going to affect your lineup of your quilt. So let's go ahead and pause and do that and come back together when you are ready to set those onto the sides. Okay, so we have our corner units sewn together and ready to go. I'm going to do just a titch, a check and a trim real quick, and it's for that point. So I'm going to grab my mat and put it out. And I'm checking right here to make sure that this is a 1/4 inch so that it's going to line up when I want to sew it and get my good point in there. So I'm going to line up my diagonal. Now that I'm trying to do this other way. There we go. I'm going to line up my diagonal line on my trim up ruler and point my triangle to my left like I did when I was trimming my flying geese. And I'm just going to line that diagonal up on the diagonal of my square, my unit here, and make sure that my 1/4 inch line on the edge here hits the point. And I'm going to straighten that edge off. Sometimes when we're sewing these triangles on, and so the tippy of my ruler is on the diagonal here. The diagonal of the ruler is on my diagonal edge, and I am just going to, it's a tiny trim, but when I line that up to sew on my block, it will make a big difference. So again, my triangle's pointing left. The diagonal edge is lined up with my center line there. I'm going to line the corner of my block up with the corner here and make sure that my 1/4 inch line along the edge of my ruler hits my goose point or my square point there. And of course you can always trim more, you can't trim less. So start out with a tiny trim if you're nervous about it. And you don't have to trim. Maybe you can just fudge it as you sew and, you know, scoot the fabric into the machine. I have done that too. To make sure that my points hit. But this is has been a good tip for me when I was invested in my points, as I am invested in my points. So I'm going to do a tiny trim here, there. So you get the idea there. Oh, I may as well do the last one since I'm right here. And then we are going to assemble this to our main unit, which I shifted. Line up, line up, line up. And tiny trim. Okay. So I've got my unit. Don't look too close. I'm gonna be real honest and share that I am working with a kidney stone right now, so my hands are shaky and my head is kind of fuzzy. So I am not super precise today, but it's coming together okay, and I am happy with it for the situation I'm in. So we are going to line up our points, and to do this, again, we're just going to put a pin through the back where your goose point meets each other, and we're going to go straight through, and then we are going to go straight through this point here, the point here on the background square where it meets with your contrast fabric, and we're going to put the pin right through that point too at the very tip of the point. Make sure we came out right on the right side. And I stand mine up straight so that I line up and my seam should nest where I have joins. And then I'm just going to pin on either side so that I don't lose that join when I take that pin out to sew. I'm going to take the pin out. I'm going to sew it all the way through. Maybe you're not a pinner, maybe you're a gluer, maybe you're a what the heck, we'll see what happens, or that's more than fine. I'm usually a finger pinner. I can't remember what quilting show I learned that term on, but I was like, oh, hey, there's a term for not wanting to put pins in. And just making sure that my seams nest, my points match. I'm going to sew all 4 sides. I'll do the 2 opposite sides first, press them out, do the other 2 sides, press them out, and I'll be back when it's done.